You know what stopped me cold at a church potluck in Lancaster County about 6 years ago? There was this dish sitting at the end of the table, looked almost like a casserole, smelled like something between a bakery and a farmhouse kitchen on a Sunday morning. I took one bite, and I genuinely could not tell you what was in it. Not because it was strange, because it was so deeply, perfectly good that my brain just went quiet. I asked the woman who made it for the recipe. She smiled and said her grandmother brought it from Ohio. That moment sent me down a 3-year rabbit hole I am still in today. I have been cooking for a long time, grew up in a family that took food seriously. Learned from my mother, learned from her mother before that. Spent decades trying recipes from every corner of the world. And I thought I had a pretty solid handle on American cooking. The classics, the comfort food, the regional stuff. I figured I knew what this country tasted like, but I was wrong in the best possible way. Because what I did not know, what most of us do not know, is that there is an entire tradition of cooking happening in the farmhouse kitchens of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri that almost never makes it into a cookbook, never shows up on a cooking show, and rarely travels beyond the communities where it was born. I am talking about Amish cooking, and not the version you might have seen on a restaurant menu somewhere in tourist country. I mean the real thing. The food these families actually make on a Tuesday afternoon in November because it uses what is in the root cellar and it feeds 12 people and it tastes like nothing you have had before. When most people hear Amish food, they think of Shoefly pie and maybe some kind of bread. And those things are real and they are good. But that is like saying Italian cooking is just spaghetti. There is a whole world underneath the surface that most people never see. Generations of families who developed recipes out of pure necessity, using what they grew, what they preserved, what they raised, and what their mothers taught them. No restaurants to fall back on, no takeout, no shortcuts, just a wood stove, a root cellar, a garden, and an understanding of flavor that gets passed down at the kitchen table before it ever gets written anywhere. What I am going to share with you today are 10 of those recipes. Dishes I have personally learned about, watched being made, or cooked myself after spending time around Amish communities in Lancaster County, Holmes County, and the Indiana settlements. Some of them you may have heard the name of, but never tasted the real version. Most of them, I would guess you have never encountered at all, and every single one of them is worth making. We are going to count down from 10 to 1, and I want you to stay with me all the way to number 1, because that last recipe is the one that genuinely changed how I think about what simple food can be. Number 10 is called Shoefly cake, not pie cake. Most people know Shoefly as a pie, and yes, that pie is extraordinary. But the cake version is something else entirely, and most people outside Amish communities have never encountered it. It is made from the same basic components: molasses, brown sugar, flour, baking soda, and hot water. But instead of a pie crust, it is baked in a deep rectangular pan, and the crumb topping, that mixture of flour and butter and brown sugar that gives Shoefly its texture, is layered through the batter in thick ribbons rather than just sitting on top. What you get is a dense, dark, sticky, warmly spiced cake that sits somewhere between gingerbread and coffee cake, with pockets of soft caramelized crumb running through it at every level. It is not a fancy dessert. There is nothing delicate about it. It is the kind of cake that gets made on a Wednesday because there is molasses in the pantry, and the family wants something sweet with their coffee after supper. And it is the kind of cake you think about for weeks afterward. I made it for the first time on a cold October night, expecting something decent, and ended up standing at the kitchen counter, eating a second slice before the first one was even gone. That is what number 10 does, and we are just getting started. Number 9 is Amish chicken corn soup, which is different enough from any corn soup you have had before that I want to describe it carefully. This is not a creamy bisque, and it is not a thin broth with corn kernels floating in it. It is a thick, hearty, deeply flavored soup made by simmering a whole chicken until the meat shreds easily. Then, adding fresh or home-canned corn, hard-boiled eggs that are sliced and added at the very end, and thin egg noodles made by hand that morning. The combination of the corn's sweetness, the richness of the chicken broth, the firm texture of the egg pieces, and the tender noodles creates something that feels both rustic and somehow complete, like every component was always meant to be together. This soup is a staple at large. Amish gatherings throughout the summer and early fall, when corn is coming off the stalk and chickens are available, families make it in enormous quantities in large outdoor kettles, and the smell of it cooking over a fire on an August morning in Lancaster County is something I genuinely cannot put into words adequately. The hard-boiled eggs are the detail that surprises people most. It sounds unusual until you taste it. Then it sounds obvious. That is how a lot of Amish cooking works. Number 8 is something I had genuinely never heard of before spending time in Holmes County, Ohio, and that is Amish sweet and sour green beans. The beans are fresh or home-canned, cooked until just tender, then tossed in a warm dressing made from bacon fat, apple cider vinegar, sugar, and a small amount of mustard. The dressing is sweet and tangy and just slightly sharp, and it coats the beans in a way that makes them taste nothing like any green bean preparation I had ever tried. There is a tradition in many Amish communities of this style of warm vinegar dressing applied to vegetables, a technique that came over from Germany and Austria with the earliest settlers and has been kept alive in these kitchens while largely disappearing from mainstream American cooking. The dish is served warm, sometimes with hard-boiled eggs sliced on top, and it sits somewhere between a salad and a side dish in a way that makes it work at almost any meal. It is one of those recipes that once you make it, you find yourself wondering why you ever prepared green beans any other way. The bacon fat is not optional. I know some of you are going to try it with olive oil. Do not do that. Not for this one. Number 7 is Amish baked oatmeal. And I know what you are thinking. You have seen baked oatmeal before. You have probably made baked oatmeal before. Stay with me anyway, because the Amish version is different in ways that matter, and once you understand those differences, you will never go back to the version you were making. It is made with rolled oats, eggs, milk, butter, brown sugar, a small amount of baking powder, cinnamon, and vanilla, baked in a deep cast iron pan until the top is just barely golden and the inside is set but still tender, almost custardy at the center. What makes it different from every other version I had tried before learning this method is the ratio. More egg, more butter, less liquid than most recipes call for. The result holds together when you scoop it, almost like a soft bar, but it melts back into something creamy the moment it hits your mouth. Amish families bake this the night before, refrigerate it, and then reheat portions through the week on the wood stove. It gets better on the second day. It gets even better on the third. I have started doubling the recipe every single time I make it, because a single pan simply does not last long enough in my house. Number 6 is Riveles soup, and it is one of the simplest things in this entire list. Riveles are small, irregular dumplings made by rubbing a mixture of flour, egg, and a pinch of salt between your palms over a pot of hot chicken or vegetable broth, until tiny, irregular pieces break off and fall into the liquid. They cook almost immediately, turning into small, soft, chewy bits that float through the broth in clusters. The whole soup takes maybe 25 minutes from start to finish, and it was traditionally made when someone was sick, when the weather turned cold unexpectedly, or when there was simply nothing else prepared and a family needed to eat. The interesting thing about Riveles soup is that it proves something I have come to believe deeply about Amish cooking. The restraint is the point. When you remove every unnecessary ingredient and you focus on getting the few simple elements exactly right, the result is not plain. It is pure. The broth needs to be good because there is nothing to hide behind. The Riveles need to have the right texture. And if both of those things are true, you have something that is genuinely comforting in a way that complicated food sometimes fails to be. Number 6 sounds like the least exciting item on this list. It might be the one you make the most. Number 5 is one that stopped me in my tracks the first time I saw it being prepared, and that is Amish funeral pie, also called raisin pie. The name comes from the tradition of bringing it to families who have lost someone, partly because raisins could be kept on a shelf through any season and the pie could be made whenever. It was needed without a trip to any store. The filling is made by soaking raisins overnight, then cooking them down with water, sugar, a small amount of vinegar, and a thickener until the mixture becomes this glossy, deep, almost jammy consistency with a flavor that is sweet and slightly tart and subtly warm from the spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, sometimes a whisper of clove. It goes into a double crust made with lard, not butter, not shortening, lard, which produces a crust so flaky and tender it practically sighs when you cut through it. The first bite is genuinely surprising. Raisin pie sounds humble, maybe even austere. What it tastes like is something between a fruit pie and a spiced custard. Rich without being heavy, sweet without being cloying, and the lard crust underneath is worth making entirely on its own. I have given this pie to people who said they did not like raisins and watched them ask for a second slice, every single time. Number 4 is Amish haystack, and before you say you have heard of it, let me tell you that the version most people know is a pale imitation of what actually shows up at large Amish community gatherings. The idea is a builder-on-layered dish, starting with crushed crackers at the bottom, then rice, then a seasoned ground beef mixture cooked down with tomatoes and onion, then shredded cheese, then lettuce, then diced tomatoes and onions, then a ladle of a warm creamy cheese sauce that has been made from scratch on the stove, and then whatever additional toppings the family sets out on the table. What makes the authentic version different from the potluck shortcut version is that every element is made from scratch and made well. The beef is seasoned with patience. The cheese sauce is real, not from a can. The crackers at the base provide a texture contrast that gets lost if you rush it. Amish communities serve this at large gatherings, funerals, barn raisings, church lunches, because it scales beautifully and because it is genuinely loved by everyone from the oldest member of the congregation to the youngest child at the table. When every component is done properly, it hits every note at once, crunchy and soft, savory and creamy, warm and fresh. I have made this for parties 3 times now, and people talk about it afterward every single time. Number 3 is Amish preaching soup, sometimes called preacher soup, and it is exactly what it sounds like. This is the soup that gets made on church Sundays when services run long and the congregation needs to be fed quickly and generously. The base is a whole chicken simmered until the meat falls off the bone, then shredded and returned to the broth with egg noodles that the family made by hand that morning, dried flat on a clean cotton cloth on the kitchen table. The broth is seasoned simply: salt, pepper, a little celery seed, sometimes a bay leaf. The noodles are thick, cut wider than you would expect, and they have a chew and a richness from the egg content that store-bought noodles simply cannot match. What makes this soup remarkable is not complexity, it is depth. A broth made from a whole bird simmered for 3 hours with the bones in is a completely different animal from a broth made in 40 minutes, from chicken breasts. The collagen from the bones gives it a body that coats the back of a spoon. The hand-cut noodles soak up that broth without losing their texture. And because there are no distracting vegetables or heavy seasonings, every bite tastes purely, profoundly like chicken. It is one of the most honest dishes I have ever eaten. Number 3 deserves to be in every home cook's regular rotation. It is that good. Number 2 is Schnitz und knepp, which means dried apples and buttons, the buttons being the dumplings. You take dried apple slices, the kind Amish families hang in their kitchens through the fall to preserve the harvest, and you simmer them for hours with a smoked ham, hock, and brown sugar until the apples soften and the broth becomes this incredible, sweet and smoky and savory liquid that defies easy description. Then you drop simple flour dumplings into that broth and cook them covered until they are pillowy and tender and have absorbed every flavor in the pot. The sweetness of the apple plays against the salt of the ham. The dumplings soak up both. There is nothing quite like it in any other cooking tradition I know of, and yet it makes complete sense as a dish designed by a community that preserved fruit in bulk and needed to use every part of a slaughtered hog through a long winter. This is what happens when a recipe is not invented, but evolved over generations by people who could not afford to waste a single ingredient. Number 2 on this list is the dish I have cooked the most times for people who have never heard of it, and I have yet to serve it to someone who did not immediately want to know how to make it themselves. And number 1 is Bouvashenkle. I saved this one for last deliberately, because I think it is the most misunderstood and the most underappreciated dish in all of Amish cooking. And once you make it, you will understand exactly why I put it at the top of this list. The name translates roughly from Pennsylvania Dutch as boy's legs, which does not make it sound any more appetizing. But stay with me, because this is one of the most satisfying cold weather dishes I have ever put in my mouth. It is essentially a beef and potato dumpling stew, but describing it that way is like calling a symphony some notes in a row. The dough for the dumplings is made from flour, egg, milk, and a little butter, mixed until it is just barely stiff enough to roll out. You cut it into rectangles. Fill each one with a mixture of seasoned mashed potato and sometimes a small amount of cooked ground beef or just butter and herbs, depending on the family. Then fold and seal the edges and drop them into a rich beef broth that has been simmering for hours with carrots, celery, and onion. The dumplings soak up that broth as they cook. They swell slightly, the outside becomes tender and silky, and the filling steams into something dense and comforting from the inside. What you get in the bowl is nothing like a soup and nothing like a stew. It is its own category entirely. The first time I made it at home, my family ate in complete silence for about 4 minutes, which in my house means something went very right, and that is the highest compliment I know how to give a recipe. What all 10 of these dishes share is something I did not fully understand until I had been cooking them for a while. They were not created to impress anyone. They were not designed to be photographed or written about or served in a restaurant. They were made to feed real people in real quantities through real winters, from real gardens and real root cellars and real animals that the family raised and preserved themselves. That context is embedded in every recipe. You can taste it, you make Schnitz knepp, and you understand that those dried apples came from a tree the family planted and tended and harvested and hung to dry themselves. The dish tastes different. When you make Riveles soup and you understand that this was what a mother made when she had almost nothing else in the house and children waiting at the table, the simplicity becomes a kind of beauty rather than a limitation. That is what I have come to believe about Amish cooking after years of paying attention to it. The wisdom is not just in the recipes. It is in the relationship between the cook and the food, between the food and the land, between the meal and the people sitting down to eat it. And every one of these 10 dishes, if you make them the right way, with the right ingredients and the right patience, will give you a small piece of that. If any of these recipes made you want to get into the kitchen, tell me which one in the comments. And if you have your own connection to Amish food or Pennsylvania Dutch cooking, I really want to hear about it. Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into cooking traditions that have been quietly getting it right for a very long time. I will see you in the next one.